Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA which sent its general director to me. I was eating cold leftover noodles on my front steps when a man I'd never seen before marched up the sidewalk like he owned the ground itself. He wore a navy blazer with a name badge that just said Lennox, CEO. Not of a company apparently, but of our little homeowners association. A CEO of an HOA. That alone should tell you the vibe. In one hand he held a clipboard, and in the other, one of those pens with 6 colors that click around like a mood ring for kindergarten teachers. He didn't say hello. He didn't look at the old dog asleep by my bushes. He just planted himself at the bottom step and announced, "Pursuant to the new use program, you'll need to provide a room in your dwelling for the association to rent as short-term housing. You don't have the option to deny access." My dog didn't look up, but I did. "You need a room in my house," I repeated, making sure I got the absurdity right. The noodles went a little gluey in my mouth. "That's correct." He clicked the pen to a bright red as if grading my compliance. "Let me save you some time," I said. "I'm the only owner who actually lives here. That makes this a very bad sales call." "Convenient," he replied. "Then you'll be the easiest to coordinate with. We'll do keys next week." For context, I live in a small cluster of cottages and townhomes knit together by a narrow road and a cracked tennis court. The HOA calls a multi-use facility when they want to justify the budget line. The developer sold my place early, then ran out of steam, so half the units were leased out by absentee owners through management companies. I am, for practical purposes, the only owner on the property who checks their own mail. Everyone else is a tenant with a landlord somewhere far away. The HOA exists to handle the road, a rock wall, landscaping, basic stuff. Not, commandeer rooms inside private houses. "Lennox," I said, "show me where in the recorded covenants it says you can convert my bedroom into a hotel." He tapped the clipboard. "We have authority to access units for maintenance, safety, and association purposes. This falls under association purposes." I held out my hand for the clipboard. He hesitated, then gave it to me like a parent handing over car keys while calculating the deductible. On top was a letterhead and a policy packet poked full of legal language like someone had emptied a salt shaker of words over it. The star of the show was a paragraph that said the HOA was implementing a space-sharing initiative to raise funds, maximize amenities, and enhance community value by renting out unused rooms in owner residences. The kicker was a sentence in bold: "Owners do not have the option to deny access for association purposes." It read like a dare. My dog sighed. I smiled. "I deny access," I said. "Then you'll be fined," he said without a beat, "and the board will authorize entry. You'll be reimbursed a standard rate, but you don't control it. You think you can walk into my house and rent out a room to strangers?" "They won't be strangers," he said, as if that improved anything. "They'll be guests of the association." There's a special corner of my mind I reserve for moments that are so audacious I have to remember them exactly. I noted the angle of his pen, the tilt of his chin, the exact wording he used. I have an old, cheap doorbell cam too, and I was very aware it was recording. If you've ever had someone try to trample your rights while wearing a blazer, you know there's a strange calm that shows up behind the outrage. The calm is where the plan grows. "Send me your authority to do that," I said, "and your notice of entry in writing. No one steps into my house without my consent unless they have a warrant or a real emergency. You know that's the law, right? It's not even complicated." He clicked the pen to blue. "Our attorney drafted this. If you think you know better." "I don't think I know better," I said. I know better. "And you should too." He took the clipboard back, ripped off a copy of the policy, and handed it to me. "This is your notice," he said, then turned and left the way he came, heels clacking on the walkway like punctuation. The noodles were cold. My mood was not. I went inside, said hello to the silence of my living room, and put the paper on my kitchen counter like it might stain anything it touched. I scanned it into a folder on my laptop labeled HOA Nonsense because I am, regrettably, that kind of person. Then texted my friend Kay. Kay is one of those quietly terrifying people you want in your corner. She's an attorney who handles real estate disputes for a living. She's also a person who says things like, "I don't like how that policy is behaving," as if it has legs and is trying to escape. I sent her photos of the policy and a summary of what the HOA's CEO had said. She called me as she left her office, and I could hear the traffic in the background. "Listen," she said. "Every state has some version of laws about homeowner associations. They can do a lot inside their lanes, common areas, assessments, enforcing recorded restrictions. But your inside space, that's your castle. An HOA can't create new servitudes after the fact. They can't say, we have a new rule that lets us convert your house into a rental. They definitely can't force entry. That's trespass. If they try, call the police. If they fine you for refusing, keep records. We'll sort it out. So I'm not crazy, I said. No, and you're also not alone, she said. But you might be the only one there who cares enough to push back. That makes you interesting to bullies. Terrific, I said. I always wanted to be interesting. You're going to want 2 things in the short term, she said. 1, a cease and desist letter. 2, eyes on whatever meeting notes or notices they're pretending to have. If they're trying this, there's probably more going on. Budget shortfalls, mismanagement, you name it. What about their fines? I asked. Don't pay a dime for a rule that was pulled out of thin air, she said. And if they send anyone, including that CEO, to step foot inside, keep it on camera. I'll send you a letter to print and tape to your door. If they cross the doorway, they're on notice for trespass. While Kay drafted, I walked around my little house and looked at it the way you do when someone threatens it. The soft dents on the wooden counter where I knead dough. The curtain rod I installed slightly crooked and never fixed because it's my curtain rod, and I like it slightly crooked. The spot in the hallway where the late afternoon sun splashes warm and makes my dog choose a nap over all other activities. None of that belongs to a board or a program. That belongs to me. I printed Kay's letter, a 1-page masterpiece that said in very clear terms that the association had no recorded right of access for non-emergency, non-maintenance purposes, that any attempt to enter without my consent would be trespass, and that any retaliation by way of fines would be unlawful and would be disputed. I taped it next to my doorbell, under the camera, right at eye level. Then I went on a walk. Our cluster isn't big, but it's dense in the way that makes a lot of neighbors who know each other's routines. There's Azaria, who's lived here since she retired 5 years ago and spends mornings tending to potted tomatoes on her patio like they're chinchilla kittens. There's Juno, a high schooler with a skateboard and a telescoping charity to offer me tech support whenever she notices me muttering at my router. There's Kellen, a musician who rents Unit 7 and practices in the afternoons until his songs sound like they came out clean the first try. Most of them are tenants, but their landlords are technically our members. That's how it is in half-finished communities, the bones of a neighborhood run by people who don't live there. Azaria saw me and waved with her elbow, hands full of tomato cages. You look like someone just told you the internet runs on goats, she said. Worse, I said. The HOA wants a room in my house to rent out. She stared at me, blinked. What? I explained the program, the CEO, the sentence that said I had no option to deny. Juno rolled up behind us, board tucked under her arm, and listened too. When I finished, they both looked at my house like it might suddenly sprout a front desk bell. Is that even legal? Juno asked. It is not, I said. Azaria pressed her lips together. They've been strange about my ramp, she said, lowering her voice. I put a little aluminum ramp at my front step so I stopped tripping over it. They sent a letter saying I needed prior approval and threatened a fine for altering the frontage in a way that it detracts from uniform aesthetics. Did you tell them it's a safety device? I asked. I did. They told me I needed to submit a full architectural application and a fee, she said. It's a ramp you pick up with one hand. They also said my tomatoes are an eyesore. The way she said tomatoes made me want to fight someone. Do not pay a fee for a ramp that keeps you safe, I said. If they fine you for that, I will make it my hobby. She smiled, tight but grateful. I don't want trouble, but I also don't want to fall. You're not the trouble, I said. Juno adjusted her board. Kellen said they tried to tell him he can't practice after 5 p.m. because it affects property values, she said. He has headphones. He's literally in headphones half the time. So they're writing fiction, I said. Good to know. When I got back to my house, I had an email waiting from the association. The subject line was, Notice of Required Accommodation, Space Sharing Initiative. It said in bullet points that I needed to identify a room in my house that could be reserved for the association's use, that I was required to provide a key, and that failure to comply would result in a $200 daily fine. It also said that if I refused access, the board would authorize entry with a locksmith. I read it twice and then forwarded it to Kay. She replied, Save everything, don't respond yet. Then she called. They're bluffing, and a bluff that big usually covers a hole, she said. I looked up some public records. Your HOA is currently run by a 3-member board, right? Supposedly, I said. I had only met one person at an annual meeting, a brief and chaotic gathering months ago in the park strip by the mailboxes where a woman named Miri read a budget off a printout, and everyone nodded because the grill started smoking and people wanted to get back to their picnic. Well, two things, Kay said. First, your state law requires open meetings with notice. If they adopted this program, they were supposed to do it in a properly noticed meeting. Second, even if they adopted it in a meeting, they can't create rights inside your home that aren't in the recorded covenants. They need owner consent to amend those. It sounds like they didn't even try. Can we find out? I asked. Absolutely, she said. You have a right to inspect association records, meeting minutes, budgets, contracts. They can't hide them. I'll send a request. Meanwhile, be present, be kind, and be a brick wall. If anyone shows up, call the police and call me. That was the legal tack. The practical tack was different. I printed the email, highlighted the part about the locksmith, and took it to my doorbell camera. I held the page up to the lens and said, "This is what they're doing. If anyone tries to enter my home, they will be trespassing." It felt dramatic, but it also felt smart. Cameras are memory. I sent a copy of the email to a folder and backed the folder up twice, because I like sleeping at night. That evening, I went for a walk, hoping movement would hold down the rising adrenaline. As the sun slid behind the old trees at the back of the property, I ran into Kellen lugging a milk crate full of pedals and cables. "You hear about the room thing?" he asked, barely pausing. "I did," I said. "I plan to make that their least favorite idea." He laughed. "I'm just a renter, but if you want signatures or something, I'll get my landlord to sign whatever you need. He's a decent guy, just lives far away." "I might take you up on that," I said. "Actually, could you help me with something small first?" "Sure," he said. "Tomorrow night, a neighbor is going to try to stand up to the board at the open forum, if they even have one. Would you be willing to come by? They can't ignore us if we show up in numbers." He grinned. "I'm excellent at being a number." The next afternoon, I got a response from the HOA, not to Kay's records request, that would be too responsible, but to me directly, reminding me of the deadline to provide a room and warning that resistance to association authority is itself a violation. I stared at the phrase resistance to association authority and wondered who taught them how to write. I drafted exactly one sentence in reply. "Any attempt to enter my home without my consent will be reported to the police." I CC'd Kay and hit send. Then I printed out 24 flyers. "Meeting tonight, open forum, bring questions." I put them under doors and taped them to the community bulletin board next to a faded poster about a yard sale from last summer. Juno helped me stick a few in places where people couldn't miss them, like the path everyone takes back from the mailboxes when they realize the package locker ate their code. The board posted their meeting agenda at 5:30. It was 2 lines. Call to order, space sharing initiative status. No open forum was listed, which is another little no-no, because state law requires an owner comment period. But the agenda was enough. I took a picture. Azaria put on her most sensible shoes. Kellen packed a protein bar as if we were preparing for a siege. We met in the multi-use facility, which is a fancy way to say the tennis court with some folding chairs stacked in a corner and a banner from a long-ago holiday potluck. 3 people sat at a plastic table. The CEO, Lennox, the manager, Miri, and a man I recognized from that unhelpful annual meeting, Trent, who had once told me we couldn't plant wildflowers because the color palette was too varied. Behind them sat a little audience of neighbors, mainly tenants who had been told to care by their better landlords, and curious people like Juno, who had brought popcorn, which you are not supposed to have on a tennis court, but we were not having tennis. Miri cleared her throat into a microphone that didn't amplify anything. "We'll begin," she said. "We've adopted a new program to address our budget deficit. The Space Sharing Initiative will allow us to monetize unused spaces in owner units through short-term rentals, which will offset increased insurance and maintenance costs. Owners do not have the option to deny access." A murmur went through the chairs like air through a flute. Lennox folded his hands and smiled, managerial and distant. I raised my hand. "Point of order," I said. "This is not an owner comment period," Miri said, frost in her voice. "It has to be," I said, keeping my tone mild. "Our state law requires reasonable time for owner comment at board meetings." Trent rolled his eyes but nodded. "Fine," he said, briefly. 2 questions, I said. 1, where is the authority in our recorded covenants that permits the association to rent out parts of private homes? 2, where is the notice of the meeting where this was adopted? Lennox leaned into the microphone that didn't work. The The board has general authority to act in the best interests of the association. This falls within that authority. That's not how recorded restrictions work, I said. You need owner approval to create new rights inside our private homes, and you need to comply with the law that requires notice of meetings. This agenda was posted an hour before the meeting. You can't adopt anything tonight, and you definitely can't force your way into my house. Miri frowned. We're not forcing our way into anything, she said. We're collaborating as a community. When you threaten locksmiths and daily fines, that's not collaboration, I said. Also, you're proposing transient occupancy. That's illegal in our zoning without a permit. You're planning to collect rental income and pay taxes, right? You've consulted the city, fire safety, egress, insurance? The popcorn stopped crunching. People were listening now the way people listen to their own heartbeat after they've been scared. Quiet. Focused. Those details are being worked out, Miri said. We need everyone on board. Good news, I said. You have me on board to follow the law, and the law says no. I could feel Kay's words in my pocket through the folded letter I had brought in case things got weird. They were already weird, but I was prepared for weirder. A tenant I didn't know stood up and said, "What happens if someone steals my stuff? Am I the one who's stuck with strangers in the unit I rent if my landlord says yes?" Another asked, "How do you choose whose house to use?" Juno asked, "Are there background checks? Who pays if there's damage?" Azaria asked very calmly, "Why did you tell me I couldn't have a ramp, but you can put paying guests in my neighbor's living room?" Lennox's smile thinned. "We won't be debating this," he said. "The board has made a decision. Cooperation is expected. Expected isn't required," I said. "Not for this." He turned to me. "You're obstructing," he said. "Correct," I said. "I'm obstructing unlawful entry into my home. I'll also be inspecting records. Consider this my written request." "Submit it to the management office," Miri said, as if that would make it vanish. "Already did," I said. "Then wait," she said. "I won't be waiting," I said. "I'll be acting." The meeting dissolved into noise because that's what happens when a board tries to bulldoze and runs into a rock wall they didn't expect. People talked over one another. A chair squeaked as someone shifted from foot to foot. The microphone continued its impression of a paperweight. In the midst of the chaos, Juno lifted her phone and took a wide photo of the board and the crowd. "For the record," she said, "documenting community engagement." That night, a curious thing happened. I received an email from a property management company in another city, the one that handles one of the absentee-owned units, asking what the space-sharing initiative was and whether it would impact their tenants' quiet enjoyment. Apparently, the tenant had texted a photo of the agenda and a summary of the meeting through the grapevine. A trickle started. 2 more owners, as in the landlords who actually had deeded title, emailed me because their tenants had mentioned it. I didn't ask for this, but I wasn't going to waste it. I told them calm, factual truths. The board had not provided authority. They were attempting to implement a radical program without owner vote, and if anyone wanted to discuss a recall or election, I had the bylaws and could outline the process. Facts are surprisingly spicy when someone has just tried to take their house. Kay, meanwhile, had sent a shapely letter on her nicest letterhead to the association's registered agent. It said, in essence, "Stop this. Disclose your records, and consider this a demand to preserve all evidence related to the initiative, including emails and contracts." Preserve is a beautiful word when used correctly. The next morning, things escalated, not with words, but with a handyman. He arrived with a tool bag and a cheerful face, and let's be clear, this man was not the villain of my story. He was a worker sent to do a job. He knocked on my door and said, "I got a work order to install a keypad on your back door for the association." I don't know the details. I pointed to the letter taped next to my doorbell. "You can take a photo of that and show your supervisor," I said. "And then you can tell them if they try to put a lock on my house, they'll be talking to an officer and an attorney." He nodded, eyes sympathetic. "I figured it might be something like that," he said, and left with a kindness that kept my heart rate normal. But 5 minutes later, I heard the rumble of a truck. I stepped out to see a man from a locksmith service stepping out with a drill and a box. Behind him, at the curb, was Lennox in his blazer and sunglasses, looking like a summer storm that had borrowed some posture from a bank ad. "You don't have authority to be here," I said, before he could perform his speech. He smiled in a way that was supposed to be professional but came off as a dare. "We're just adding an association lock," he said. "You'll retain your lock in use, of course." "You're just trespassing," I said, and tapped my phone screen. "This call is to dispatch," I added, and gave them our location. "And just so you know, Any drilling into my door is criminal damage. The locksmith, a practical person, looked at me, then at Lennox. I'm not doing work where someone objects, he said, and set his box back in the truck. He handed me a business card and said, they didn't tell me the owner was home. I'm always home when the law knocks, I said, and thanked him. Lennox's jaw flexed. You're accruing fines, he said, and turned to leave as my doorbell camera captured his third act exit. The officer who arrived 15 minutes later was exactly the right kind of officer for this situation. Calm, curious, and informed. He looked at Kay's letter, the email, my door, my very normal house, and then at me. Do you have any kind of restraining order, he asked. Not yet, I said, but I will if they come back with a drill. I explained the situation. He nodded a lot. A private association can't just walk into your home, he said, more for his notes than for me. If they try again, call us. And do you want to make a report now so there's a record? Yes, I said, because records make future nonsense smaller. By lunch, the board had emailed a clarification that said they wouldn't be entering any dwelling without proper coordination. It was an attempt to soften the tone while not surrendering the claim. I replied with a very narrow sentence. You do not have authority to enter my dwelling for the purpose of renting space, coordinated or otherwise. Kay cheered from afar. Keep it simple, she said. The tenants started performing small acts of democracy. Juno made a shared drive where people could drop letters they got from the HOA so we could all see the pattern. Kellen knocked on doors and asked people if they'd be willing to forward landlord contact info so we could notify actual owners of what was happening. Azaria wrote a letter that somehow managed to be polite, firm, and slightly devastating. In it, she said, I am a retired teacher who lives quietly and waters tomatoes. I voted for the promise of a stable community, not for a revolving door of strangers managed by people who don't live here. She printed it and put it under the office door, and I hope whoever read it felt the weight of its decency. 2 days later, Kay received a reply to her records request. It was thin, too thin, no minutes, no financials beyond an outdated budget, but it contained one significant thing: a draft contract with a short-term rental platform consultant, someone who promised the HOA a turnkey solution to unlock hidden value in underutilized residential inventory. The draft included a revenue split, a marketing plan, and a line about owner resistance mitigation strategies. That part made my jaw set. It also made our path very clear. Here's the play, Kay said, voice clipped with focus. You call a special meeting. Your bylaws allow owners to petition for one if 10% sign. Since most owners are absentee, we'll need their proxies. The tenants can't vote, but they can reach their landlords. We hold the meeting, require open discussion, and demand the board suspend the program and schedule a real election. If they refuse, we go to court for an injunction and records. Meanwhile, we alert the city that an HOA is planning unpermitted transient occupancy. Is that my job? I asked, half worried, half thrilled. It's your home, she said, which makes it your job. I spent that evening on the county's public records website, which is a labyrinth that rewards the patient and the caffeinated. I pulled the duty of going parcel by parcel, finding the deeded owners, cross-referencing with tax addresses, then sending a letter to each one that said, your HOA is trying to rent out rooms inside private homes without owner vote. There will be a special meeting. Here's the date. You can vote by proxy. Please show up because this matters. I did not editorialize. I did not rant. I sent facts, a copy of the Space Sharing Initiative, and a pre-filled proxy form with the option to appoint me or your own designated representative. I paid too much for certified mail because no one can claim they didn't get what a green card proves they got. Then, because this wasn't just about property law, I made another call to the city's code office. I explained politely that our homeowners association was attempting to start informal, distributed short-term rentals inside private homes under the banner of a space sharing initiative. I asked if such a thing required permits. The officer, a man named Nico with a voice like a bass note, said, that would be a zoning violation without approval, and fire might have something to say about that. He took down the details, and I could almost hear him frowning into his notepad. The next morning, Kellen sent me a text. Just talked to my landlord. He's furious, wants to help. Can he call you? He did, and so did 3 others. Owners who had been happy to let the HOA mow the grass and balance the budget were suddenly very awake. The board had mistaken tenant silence for consent and owner distance for indifference. They were about to learn the difference between quiet and sleeping. A few hours later, I received my first violation notice for failure to comply with the space sharing initiative. It assessed a $200 fine and threatened escalating penalties. I printed it, put it in a folder labeled Case, and wrote across the top in blue pen, Retaliation. On the afternoon before our special meeting, an unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb. A man got out wearing a business casual uniform, button-down, khaki confidence, and knocked. "I'm here to serve notice," he said, and handed me a packet that said, unbelievably, "Notice of board authorized entry for the purpose of installing association lock. Final notice." "Thank you," I said, because it wasn't his fault, and filed it under evidence. Then I sent an email to the board that said, "If anyone steps over my threshold without my consent, I will call the police and file for a restraining order. You have received notice. I advise you to consult your counsel." Kay seconded that email by forwarding her earlier letter with a crisp note, "Our client will seek all remedies." By then, the group chat Juno had set up for neighbors and distant owners was busy. Someone shared a screenshot of a message from Miri telling them not to attend the special meeting because it was not sanctioned. Someone else posted that they'd received a reminder that proxies were invalid unless submitted through management, which is the kind of nonsense you write when you hope no one owns a copy of the bylaws. I posted the relevant section of the bylaws that said owners could call a meeting and submit proxies directly. No management middleman required. Clarity is a disinfectant. On the day of the special meeting, I dressed like myself. Jeans, a blue shirt, a jacket with big pockets for proxies and pens. Juno wore a hoodie that said simply Civics, which made me smile. Azaria brought cookies because she is the kind of person who brings cookies to democracy. Kellen showed up with two of his bandmates who were not owners and therefore could not vote, but could move chairs and look like the future belongs to people who show up. We set up in the multi-use facility again because where else do you put a revolution when the clubhouse is a tennis court? People trickled in. Tenants who had convinced their landlords to give them proxies, landlords who had driven in from other towns, and three interesting new faces who looked like they hadn't set foot on the property in a long time. At 5 minutes past our listed start time, Miri sent an email saying the board would not attend because the meeting was improper. 5 minutes after that, a city car rolled up. Nico, the code officer with the bass voice, stepped out with a folder and a plastic clipboard. 2 minutes later, a fire department SUV arrived. A captain I would come to know as Omar walked in with him. Sometimes the universe says, "I see your nonsense, and I raise you an audience." I opened the meeting with a sentence that was true and careful. "We are gathered to discuss a program the board attempted to adopt without owner vote that would place paying guests inside private homes. This meeting was called according to our bylaws. We will take sign-in, count proxies, and proceed." Nico leaned toward Omar, then addressed the room. "We received a call you plan short-term rentals inside private homes," he said. "That triggers zoning approvals permits. Because it functions like lodging, it must meet fire safety standards. We don't enforce HOA rules, but we do enforce city law." Omar added, "Occupancy, egress, and smoke detector requirements apply. We'd have to inspect. Not saying never, but what you described isn't legal now." I let the silence work, then presented proxies, over the 10% to call a meeting and flirting with a majority, read Kay's letter into the record, and moved to suspend the space sharing initiative, bar board entry into homes without written consent, and call an election in 30 days. Lennox swept in. "This is not a sanctioned meeting," he said. "Then it's owners agreeing what we'll sue over," I answered. "We've voted to suspend your program. Also, the city is here," he recalculated. "You're not on the board. For now," I said. Owners stood. "I own 2 units. That changes now." "I don't authorize guests in anyone's home," Lennox tried. "We have budget constraints," Nico replied. "Revenue doesn't legalize trespass." We adjourned with a checklist, election, letter, notice. I expected retreat. Instead came a reminder that fines were due. Kay said, "Don't respond. They're building our case." Then the ex-bookkeeper called. She'd quit because things felt wrong. Check transfers labeled amenities consulting. The rental contract isn't signed by the board. It's countersigned by the manager. Her spreadsheet showed small withdrawals adding up fast. We moved. Kay sent a preservation demand and filed for a temporary restraining order. At the hearing, the judge read the line, "Owners do not have the option to deny access," and asked, "Under what theory may a private association enter a home and rent it without an easement or consent?" The answer was a word salad about broad authority. The judge granted the TRO. No locks, no entry, no fines, and produce records. The board stopped talking locksmiths but kept mailing red ink invoices. A collection letter arrived. We replied with the TRO and a reminder that collecting what's not owed is its own problem. Meanwhile, the drainage swale was clogged. Faced with photos and pressure, they cleared roots and repaired a crushed pipe. Azaria's front step ramp was approved only after a fair housing request and a nudge from the state. She marked it with a ramp-shaped cake. Kellen's no practice after 5 ended with a rule mirroring city quiet hours, confirmed by a decibel meter. The records arrived, no minutes, a memorandum of understanding with Meridian Apex Solutions, a leadership stipend for a program CEO, signed by the manager. The scrawl on Meridian's side looked a lot like Lennox's. We called a proper election with a platform, no entry without consent, transparency, fix what's broken. Owners mailed proxies. We won. First agenda, terminate the program, void contracts, withdraw fines, fire management, order a forensic audit, repair the swale, adopt an accommodation policy, open the books. Done. The injunction became permanent. The audit mapped leaks, consulting, and leadership payments to Meridian and Lennox, reimbursements without receipts, cash coded as outreach, and a memo, recode as maintenance to minimize questions. We claimed on the fidelity bond, got paid in part, sued the management company, notified regulators. The state levied fines. Lennox took a diversion deal with restitution and a ban from association work, plus a civil settlement keeping him off our property. Meridian dissolved. Restitution funded asphalt, paint, a safe railing. We wrote a private dwelling integrity rule. The inside of a home is off-limits absent emergency or lawful inspection. We funded reserves so no one would try to monetize bedrooms again. Tenants got an apology and coffee huddles. The court became a garden and a meeting hall. Justice wasn't cinematic, it was cumulative. The people who overreached got smaller. The people who showed up got louder. And I kept my crooked curtain rod, my sunlit hallway, and the certainty my front door isn't a turnstile. In the end, the HOA didn't get a room in my house. They got a board that does its job. The CEO got an education and consequences. And when someone knocks, my neighborhood knows how to answer, firmly. Friends, thank you. See you soon.